Hello, PLP geometry, and welcome to the 7th lesson in our Unit 2 covering congruent transformations in triangles. So this is actually going to be a 2-video lesson, so this is video 7A. So again, we're still in Unit 2. Again, we're talking about congruent transformations. And again, we're on to the triangles. And again, this is a very exciting video because 7A here is going to warm us up to how we're going to work with proving triangles congruent. Okay, so in this video, what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about some helpful things to use when proving triangles congruent. And then in the next video, 7B, we're going to walk through 3 proofs together. So first and foremost, let's revisit from the previous videos the 5 ways to prove triangles congruent. To prove triangles congruent. 5 ways to prove triangles congruent. Those 5 ways are side, 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 3 sides congruent, side, angle, side, 2 sides congruent, and the angle between those, angle, side, angle, 2 angles congruent, and the side between them, angle, angle, side, 2 angles, and a side not between the 2 angles. And then for our right triangle friends, we have HL, which is hypotenuse and leg. Okay, so now let's talk about some helpful vocab for our proofs. Helpful vocab for triangle proofs. And again, you're going to see that some of this stuff is things you've done in the past, because in geometry, it's very important that you don't forget anything. So first, let's talk about a midpoint and a segment bisector. I'm going to put it right here, segment bisector. Okay, so in a picture, how do we identify if something is a midpoint, or what does a midpoint do, right? So if I have a segment, right? We're going to call this segment AB. AB. And I have a point that looks in the middle, right? M. That does not mean that M is a midpoint. M is not a midpoint until they tell you. Or if they tell you M is a midpoint, then you know it breaks the segment into 2 congruent segments. So knowing that M is a midpoint, if they say M is a midpoint, then what that means for you is that in this picture, segment AM is congruent to segment BM. So again, a midpoint creates congruent segments. So in parentheses, I'll put congruent segments. Now, if you have your midpoint drawn, and then you have a line or a ray or a segment going through that midpoint like this, call this L, now you have what's called a segment bisector. So M is the midpoint, and line L is the segment bisector. Okay, so there's our first of 6 helpful vocabs for proofs. Okay, next. We have an angle bisector, right? So again, so remember our friend, Mr. Angle Bisector. So with an angle bisector now, we're going to take an angle and split it into 2 congruent angles. So say I have this angle right here. Let's use 3 letters. Let's call this A, the vertex B, and this point down here, C. And then I have a ray, typically angle bisectors is a ray, and I have ray BM, and let's call this an M. So you will know that it's an angle bisector because it creates two congruent angles here and here, labeled with the arc marks. So if ray BM is the angle bisector, then it creates two congruent angles. We'll name them angle ABM, being congruent to angle CBM. And again, we create congruent angles. Okay, third. Keep changing colors here. Number 3 here, we have the word perpendicular. I spelled it wrong, sorry. Not pre, perpendicular. Or you might have a perpendicular bisector, right? So I just put the word bisector in parentheses. Perpendicular or a bisector. So again, remember when you hear the word perpendicular, you should think of right angles. So if I have a segment here, right, call this segment AB, and I have a point, and I have a line or ray or segment going through that point. Again, I'm going to call this point M for later. Let's call this line CD. And then I have a right angle box, right? That means that those two objects are perpendicular. Perpendicular means it forms right angles. So in this picture here, I would know that angle AMC is a right angle. Now, knowing that AMC is a right angle means that all 4 of those angles are right angles. So again, you really create 4 right angles. Now, part of our proofs, right, is if I were to draw in segment AC, right, I now have a triangle right here, triangle AMC. If angle AMC is a right angle, then that means that triangle AMC is a right triangle. And it is a right triangle because it has one right angle. Now, recall that the bisector part comes into play if you have congruent segments. So if this line CD is perpendicular and it splits the segment into 2 congruent segments, then it is a perpendicular bisector. It plays 2 roles. Okay, 3 down, 3 to go. All right, another oldie but goodie is going to be our vertical angles. Okay, so let's recall that vertical angles are formed by intersecting lines. So let's put a line there. Let's call this line AB. AB. Let's put a line here. Let's call that line CD. And then let's say they intersect at point E. Well, remember, the vertical lines are the lines that are across from each other. So this angle here and this angle over here, the one opening to the left and the one to the right. They are going to be congruent. So in this picture, if I'm told, or not if I'm told, if I see this like this, right, I see 2 lines intersecting, I know that angle AEC is congruent. AEC is congruent to angle BED. And this is because vertical lines create congruent angles. The other pair, the one opening up and the one opening down, are also congruent. Okay, next, another oldie, parallel lines. So in a picture, and again, think about triangles, but in a picture we're going to have 2 lines, and again there'll probably be segments in the triangle pic. Let's call this A and B, and we'll have another line going down here, Let's call this line CD. Let's connect C and B to make the transversal. So when it comes to parallel lines, if you remember those 4 angle pairs corresponding, alternate interior, alternate exterior, and same side interior angles, the ones you're going to use a lot are the alternate interior angles. If you see this picture, again, if line AB is parallel to line CD, then the parallel line and the transversal makes a Z. If you can see this, I'll do it in green. So A to B to C to D makes a Z. Inside those Z's are your alternate interior angle. Those 2 angles are going to be congruent. So we would name our angle ABC. ABC would be congruent to angle DCB. And that is because these angles are alternate interior angles, and alternate interior angles are congruent. Okay, and I will clear the screen for the last new property that we're going to learn that's very important for triangle proofs. So this is a new one. That means new, sorry. This is number 6, and it's called the reflexive property. The reflexive property. So you're going to see pictures like this, where you have 2 triangles making up one big one. So if this is the big triangle, let's call that triangle ABC, and then we have a segment going down through them. Let's call that segment AD. Well, if I were to take those 2 triangles and break them apart, you would see that segment BD would go with both of them. Segment BD is used in the triangle on the left and the triangle on the right. So the reflexive property simply says that segment BD is congruent to segment BD. Right? You are looking at 2 objects that are identical, right? So when I think of reflexive property, I think of a mirror. Right? When you look in the mirror, you see yourself, right? So we are going to use the reflexive property typically when you have a side shared by a triangle. So it's the side shared by 2 triangles. Again, you would mark it congruent to itself by putting a single dash, but a double dash, but it's the only dash you need to put because it's congruent to itself. Okay, so this was our revisiting of some vocab. So now the next video, 7b, we'll talk about some of these triangle proofs. Thanks for watching.